We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto our interview series, Leah Heck. She is the Workplace Culture and Communication Consultant and Executive Coach and is currently consulting with Bumble. Leah, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
That's awesome. Thank you for having me, Christina. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Leah, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And as a grown-up, I'm an executive coach. You know, I specialize in workplace communication, leadership development, and team dynamics. I love the way that you ask this question about what do you want to be when you grow up, because you ask it as how did I answer it, as opposed just to what I wanted to be. And yeah, for me, those were two different things. I grew up in the 80s. It was a recession. My mom was a cocktail waitress. I was on the school lunch program. It was not a situation that was very, didn't have a lot of exposure to a lot of different things. And so in the pop culture that I watched, which was things like LA Law, I'm like, oh, those are successful people. So therefore I want to be a lawyer because I want to be successful. I want growth. And it was funny though, because like the more that I learned about what lawyers did after I'd already committed to the world by answering it in that way, I'm like, no, that's not what I want to do at all. Instead, what I really actually loved to do was pore over floor plans and look at buildings. But again, we were in the recession, so there weren't any buildings being built. It wasn't like it seemed like it was a viable career. So I definitely like opted for what I thought was the right answer as opposed to what I really wanted to do. I ended up finding my way into advertising because I felt like there were always going to be ads. Luckily, that brought me into the workplace culture, and ultimately, that's very much like architecture of like figuring out the flow of humans and how they work together in a workplace environment. So it all ended up working out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting to think about our environment and the foundation of how we answer that question, what we thought our life would look like. But things are always changing as well. And in terms of workplace culture and the role of work in folks' lives today, I think over the past 2 years, we've seen a lot of change and adaptability, which is really great. What change are you most excited to see in terms of this workplace culture and this evolution that we've seen and a lot of creativity?
Yeah, you're right. These last 2 years have been dramatic, to say the least. This question brought me back to a very distinct memory I had. I was in Austin. I was at a show in downtown right before the lockdown. Like we were just understanding what was happening. And I ran into a friend who was in HR at Indeed. And they had just announced that day that they were going to shut down all the offices. Everyone was working from home. And at the time, it was before South by got canceled or any major events got canceled. And I just remember thinking, one, what foresight they had. Like they clearly are seeing things that we're not seeing yet. And then also just the impact of that. And at first I was just like, wow, that's brave that they were going to be shutting it down. But then like as we talked more, I'm like, wait, this is huge because this is going to completely change the workplace dynamic. I've been fighting for years. I shouldn't say fighting. I've been working for years trying to help people have more flexible work environments, particularly because it's really difficult for introverts to be in these open offices. And they needed to be able to concentrate. And I was trying to help them in their work. But it was always difficult because, you know, executive leadership just didn't feel like they trusted their teams enough to let them go home. So in this moment, it was that realization, like we are all about to jump into a global experiment of complete workplace redesign. And so that's the thing about these last 2 years that I am just so happy for, is that we proved the experiment out. It's possible. People can be not just productive, but often more productive if they have the ability to be at home. But I think that we've also learned that that's hard too. There's a lot to that. And it takes a lot of energy to be alone sometimes. And so I think the thing that I'm most looking forward to based off of these last 2 years is the the pendulum settling with the idea of it being a hybrid workplace, but not just hybrid in the idea of come in 2 days a week, or do something from a time-based perspective, but more hybrid from the type of work that you're doing and where is the best place for that work. I recently facilitated a number of offsite sessions for different teams. And this idea of bringing our teams together for very concentrated work, and that work is bonding, that work is brainstorming, it's planning, it's doing the things that we do better when we're all together, and then having plans and direction to be able to go back to our homes and get the work done. And I love the idea of that being a potential cadence for people, of being able to have distinct work together times and then distinct work alone times.
I love that distinction in terms of collaboration and bonding and what work you can really get done together, kind of similar to when you have a meeting, defining it as informational, or is it collaborative? Is it interactive? Define the time we have together, and then the actual follow-up for you to email and follow through on everything that you talked about is really that kind of heads down time for yourself too. And I would not describe myself as an introvert, but the open floor plan of the office is something that always used to give me anxiety as well. I know you mentioned at the beginning, your experience in executive coaching, and I'm learning a lot about executive coaching through these conversations and just the role that it's also had over the past 2 years. For folks who aren't familiar, can you tell me about your definition of executive coaching and how it is different and really unique from other types of coaching?
Yeah. That's also been a fascinating thing over the last probably decade. The idea of coaching has taken on a lot of life, and that goes across all different kinds of coaching. There's, about life coaches and the idea of what are your personal goals and what do you want to get out of your life and how do you balance everything together. Career coaches, so that you can figure out what the best workplace is for you. And then so executive coaching is a natural extension of that, but it's specifically for executive leaders. And the type of people that go into executive coaching could either go in from a coaching background or having some organizational development background, or they could be specifically in the type of executive. So having an expertise in the field that the executive is in, and helping people at that level, because it's different than other levels. I think for me specifically, there's a number of different ways that people can go through coaching. There's some very programmatic coaching that happens at the executive level, where they will take someone through a 6-month program that's almost like a learning and development course, where they get to know themselves, they get to know, where they want to be and how they can grow within their workplace. For me specifically, the way that I address executive coaching is in real time. So I work with executives on what the situation is in front of them the next 2 weeks, like the situations that they're dealing with right now. And we're able to apply a lot of those leadership theories in the moment so that it's a quicker uptake on those theories, because we're putting them in action right then. But most of all, I think the thing that executive coaches in particular can provide, and something that I'm very passionate about, is a safe space for executives to be able to talk. Because as you continue on in your career, you have less peers and you have less people that you can talk to. And even sometimes within your peer group, it's inappropriate for you to have some of these conversations,
Right.
Yeah. And so being able to be that vessel to hold on to information that they might not want the rest of the world to know as they're processing it, I think is really important. So providing a place where they can help untangle, where they can have someone help them untangle the issues that they're going through and navigate the workplace as it is super helpful. And then also with a broader idea of, at an executive level, you're not just dealing with your team, you're dealing with the whole company culture. And so how does their actions and the way that they lead affect the company as an entirety too? So it's complicated, but mostly what I'm there for is the person in real time with a safe space where they can process things.
Yeah, that real time is super important as questions come up and situations and problems to solve in conflicts. And that is something that we've heard, especially with people leaders too, in terms of it isn't appropriate sometimes to talk to your peers about what's happening and what's going on and asking for advice too. And it's important also to have someone to talk to, not about theoretical or hypothetical situations. Can you tell us about a kind of example of a successful outcome after working with an executive for a couple years, knowing that change probably does not happen overnight or within a quarter? It's definitely a long-term process with a lot of internal work.
Yep, it's definitely a long-term process. And honestly, it's a lifetime process because we're all continuing to grow, which is lovely. That's a good thing. So for me, after 2 years in particular, what I really love watching is people coming back to me and the weight of the conversations being less about all of the issues and then more about how they have applied a solution to it that we may have talked about years ago, but it's come up again and they were able to solve it on their own based off of the experience that they had prior, or them being able to notice flags of issues that could pop up, but they were able to do something about it a lot sooner, so it didn't become a much bigger issue. But really, I think what I do with executives is help them like concentrate on their own leadership core of defining who they are in leadership. Because yes, there's a lot of different checklists of what leaders should be, but you have to have that feeling for yourself of like, who are you authentically? And what do you bring to an organization or a team? And so helping them build that so that they're more confident in whatever new situation comes at them, that they can pull a tool out that's authentic to themselves to handle it. And so to me, the mark of like good progress is that they come back and tell me about it before it even happens, or that they tell me that they taught somebody else how to do it because they saw it happen in someone else and they were able to pass it on.
Yeah, that's the ultimate, not for lack of a better word, test, but just that you really internalize something on you, are able to identify and teach that skill to someone else, pass it along, and really share that feedback with you as their coach as well. Have you seen any common trends or feedback from executives who you're coaching over the past year as well, in terms of questions that pop up or just any kind of patterns over time?
Yeah, definitely the idea of having a safe space to talk. But that's something that executives are craving, and they probably don't even realize how much they need it until they have it, and then it's a dump, and it's like, whoo, they feel so much better being able to let go of the things that were in their head, because I think that that's something too that probably has happened more over these last couple of years than maybe in situations prior, which is that we have gotten in our heads a lot. Being more isolated means that we have more time to think on our own. And sometimes that can become a swirl, sometimes that can be detrimental to constantly go through it. So being able to have someone to be able to kind of dump it and check, is this real or not? Is this a feeling I'm having, or is this based off of something of reality that's there? So being able to have someone to be able to work that through is really important, and something that I've found has been universally valued over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. Having that space, having that kind of support and two-way conversation to really think through all of these decisions that are being made and all of the things that are being asked of you as well as a leader, as an executive. There's no cookie cutter training or kind of check the box situation for, if you do these things, you are a great leader. You have to really develop the authentic leadership, as you were talking about, to really define that for yourself. And one of the changes we've seen over time is really people learning how to lean into being empathetic and vulnerable in their own way too. What is the best way you've seen really executives learn to be more vulnerable and empathetic in the workplace, no matter where they are in their journey?
Yeah, kind of what you said there was true. There's no one way to do it. So I think the first thing is personal awareness and understanding where you're coming from or where you're starting from when you are wanting to develop your empathy. So I also studied personality, and which I just find so fascinating, and I love to watch it play out. And there's the idea of emotional empathy. And from a personality perspective, particularly Myers-Briggs, that's the typical idea of thinking or feeling. And feeling generally in the way that we talk about it in society now, it equates itself to emotional empathy, of like being able to feel how others feel and understand some of those emotions on a visceral level, which is different. And then there are people who are thinkers who get to things from a logical perspective. And what I found is that the best thing that we can do is strive for what they refer to as cognitive empathy, which is like a higher level version of empathy that takes the emotional empathy understanding of others and pairs it with the logical approach of a thinker to get to the point where you are actually understanding what another person's needs are that may be separate from your own, or what your own experiences are from it, and committing to act for what they need. So it's a very logical approach to empathy of like, let's understand what this other person needs. And it may be different than what I think they need or what I might have needed in that situation. And what's great about that is that it comes from a place of developing curiosity, asking questions, trying to understand, and get to a place where you feel comfortable acknowledging that you right off the bat may not have an answer for it, but that through questions and understanding, you'll get to that place.
I forget who I was talking to this week, but they were talking about seeking to understand before being understood. And I think that speaks to what you talked about in terms of being curious and really seeking to understand the needs of this person before your own as well, which is definitely something that needs to be practiced, and just like any other skill and thought about too. In your experience as an executive yourself, and also kind of on the other side of relationships, whether it's a kind of another senior leader or someone on their team managing up, has been a conversation too, especially in a hybrid or remote world. What is your advice for folks who are not executives to really effectively manage up to these executives and leaders who, of course, have so much going on their plate too?
Yeah. It's the same answer. It's cognitive empathy. It's the idea of being able to look in your environment and try to understand what is it that your manager needs and what are they going through, because it can be so easy to concentrate on what you need from your manager or what you need from the organization you're working with, and it's and be kind of myopic in that way. And once you're able to step away from it and ask yourself, well, what do they need of me to be able to do their job better, or to get the information up to their boss? Because they probably have a boss, and that boss is probably has lots of expectations of them. So it can be a very similar experience. But what's interesting about it is that at first glance, that feels like a lot of work. Like the idea that you would have to think through what your boss wants and needs before they might ask you for something. But what I found is that if you think of it as a practice, and if you think of it as a way of understanding what their role is, you're actually doing yourself a favor by kind of practicing what it would be like to be in that position. So by thinking empathetically of what does your manager need and being able to provide them what they need, then you're also already thinking like a manager, and you're already getting there and practicing those thoughts so that when it's your time to become that person, if that's what you want,
Right.
then you are better prepared for it, and you'll have had kind of that marinating and processing time that a lot of people don't do until all of a sudden they've been given this title of manager, and they end up being a little bit stunted because they haven't been thinking in that way during the process. So by using cognitive empathy, you can get to know what your manager needs a little bit better, and you're starting to practice what you would do in that situation once you get there.
Yeah, that cognitive empathy is definitely really important to really think about and practice. And when we're talking about empathy and vulnerability and really managing, we've also heard, the conversations around no one leaves an organization, they leave a bad manager, or they stay in an organization for their manager because they are so great. How should we be thinking about holding managers specifically really accountable and senior leaders? How do we know if they are being effective leaders and practicing these really important skills?
Yeah. It's honestly a hard one because there's a lot of different ways that we try to put this in a quantifiable way,
Right.
or being able to do it where there are KPIs involved, and we can check that box of yes, this person is doing a good job,
Yeah.
or no. But it's really tricky because a lot of times that kind of data can be misinterpreted by the wrong people, and it could be taken in the wrong way. So one of the things that I immediately go to when I think of something like this is Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety.
Yep.
And in her, intro TED talk to psychological safety, she talks about how, when she was on search for these idealized teams that had a very psychologically safe environment, she had her researchers go look at hospitals and try to find the hospitals that had the lowest mistake rates or error rates that were there. But what she found is that when she compared it to the research about which hospitals had the most psychologically safe teams, it was a almost reverse correlation where the most psychologically safe teams actually reported higher mistakes. And that was because they had a trusted environment where they could talk about what the mistakes were.
Yeah.
And they were open to it. So if you were to have just judged these hospitals by the KPIs of the reported errors, you'd come up wrong because they were hiding the errors in the terrible places. And so you have to be really careful about exactly what type of things we use to track managers. So what I end up coming back to is a typical NPS score, Net Promoter Score. And I used to think that was way too trivial, that was something that boiled it down to something that was too basic. But it ends up getting to a place where you can consolidate all of the nuance in an idea of like, would you work for this manager again? Or as a leader, would you hire this manager again? Would you recommend other people work for them? Because then it allows for the nuance to be there of like, sometimes, like if you were to try to judge someone by their retention rates, that may be completely inappropriate. Like, yes, it would be great for you to keep more people on your team, but what if the best thing for the person and for the company is for the person to move on? Exactly. And so there's a lot of nuance that's there. So if I absolutely was forced to pick a quantitative or a KPI, it would be a Net Promoter Score. But really what I would want is good people talking about them in a nuanced way that can appreciate and understand that what we're really driving towards is what is right for the company and what's right for the person, and finding that Venn diagram of where they match and being happy and okay if they don't match and letting everybody move on from it.
Absolutely. That Venn diagram kind of visual is really important to think about when we're talking about managers too. And with people in general, the psychology of folks, psychological safety is something that we really value here at AllVoices too, of creating that space in a really intentional way as well, and continually asking how people are feeling and kind of understanding the context behind this as well. I know in terms of data, company culture, which is in the title of this show, is something that so many people are talking about. It's an important word used in interviews. What is the company culture like? What does it mean to live a day in the life at X company? What are the ways, I'm going to bring data back into it again, qualitative and quantitative ways we think about measuring this dynamic thing of company culture?
Yeah. And again, of course, a squishy answer to that because it's hard to measure it. It also depends on who's doing the judging, if you will. Is it someone within the organization who's trying to better the company culture? Is it someone outside of the organization deciding whether or not they'd be a right candidate or a right match for a role that's there? And so I think you can come at it from different ways based on what your intentions are. And I think that, from a candidate perspective, looking at things like Glassdoor and looking at things like cultural engagement numbers that the company may publish are good. They're going to be biased. So what the company says is going to be their best version, and what Glassdoor a lot of times is people venting their frustration, and so it could be the worst of those things. Mm-hmm. So it's pairing all of these things together and then being really active in asking nuanced questions about it. So if you're the candidate, it's asking nuanced questions of the interviewers in the process, of people that have worked there, and then trying to make sure to see if it's the match for you, because it may not have been a match for somebody else. And that's why a Glassdoor review is really bad, but it may be the perfect environment for you. And then on the other side, if you're a part of an organization and you're trying to help your corporate culture, it's looking into your engagement scores and looking into the deeper dive of where things might be a little heated versus where it feels really good, and having curiosity around it and asking more questions and trying to figure out what we can do to make it better. So I'll go back to NPS because that's a thing that allows us to understand that regardless of what the situation is, would we recommend somebody working there? Would we recommend someone deciding that it was the right place for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, asking those big questions, understanding that again, it comes with nuance and it's not a black and white perspective here as well. And my best place to work is not your best place to work, which is someone else's best place to work as well, in different kind of parts of your career and life too, and understanding that that can change, to really cultivate great places for people to really find their moments of flow, and for leaders to really have that growth and flexible mindset. What would you say executives need to have or start doing immediately, in addition to cognitive empathy and some things that we've talked about?
It's funny, I love growth mindset. I'm glad you brought it up, because I think one of the first things executives should do is actually read the book and make sure that they know about it. But I know for me, just even the understanding of the difference between with having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset was really helpful. And understanding that in myself too, and realizing that we probably all have that kind of mindset depending on what situation we're in. And then how do you cultivate that growth mindset? I think that having read the book, one of the things that I enjoyed so much was the discussion around watching the children that exhibited this growth mindset and their absolute joy in trying to solve a problem, and that they found so much just excitement and energy, and it didn't matter if they failed or because they were learning from it. And I think that is such a lovely key, is that what we need to do is find joy in work. And so what can you do to be able to find that, cultivate it for the people that are on your team, whether you're the leader or you're on the team, finding those moments of joy. And also what I loved about mindset is that the joy came from the work itself. It wasn't necessarily brought in by a margarita machine or brought in by a company perk that we did to try to take our minds off of work. It was in the work itself. And so the idea of finding joy within work is more than fluffiness. It's more than just trying to, again, check off a box of what we do for our organizations to make it fun to work there. It's about removing hurdles. It's about providing less stress when it comes to the day-to-day work, which marries with another thing. There's a really great series on LinkedIn that Dan Ariely has put together about decision making. And he talks about how when we're stressed, we actually limit our decisions. We limit the scope of inputs that we have, and our view narrows. And what's interesting about that is that if you go at it from that perspective, what you're doing when you're finding joy is pulling people from a stressed place where their decision making is limited to a place where they have a wider scope of inputs and come at it with a different energy. And with that, it actually makes work better, more productive. So fun workplaces, when it's about reduction of stress, actually makes people feel more productive in the work that they do. And it, creates this wonderful cycle of productivity.
Absolutely. It definitely affects productivity. It affects your mindset. I would say most of us need to work as part of our life. So finding those pockets of joy and really cultivating that for others is really important as well. I know we were talking a lot about kind of your current experience as a consultant and executive coach. Is there anything, you wish you could tell your previous self who's in that people operator and executive role, knowing what you know now and having these experiences?
Um, the answer to that is no, because I think that all of my experiences are the things that made me who I am today. So I kind of feel like I would be cheating myself out of the visceral feeling of failure if I gave myself a cheat code, or I taught myself something too early.
Yeah.
So I appreciated, working as a marketing director and understanding what it was like to try to motivate a team to get some things done. I really appreciated what it was like to switch careers and having to learn things brand new and diving into something that was unfamiliar, but going for it. And I appreciated the times when I had talks that totally failed, because it made me better and it made me understand what it would be like in those situations for the people that I work with. So I wouldn't take any of it back. I would just probably say enjoy it, like absorb everything that you're going through, because it will help you be a better leader in the future, and that's a good thing.
Be a sponge, absorb it all, and think about that as well, and then pass it along. Leah, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or maybe underscoring a couple of key takeaways you hope people bring with them after hearing our conversation?
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I was fortunate enough with my marriage that I watched as my husband went from being a graphic designer to completely changing his career and becoming a firefighter.
Oh, wow.
And he was, yeah, I know, and he was really good at graphic design. It wasn't like it was just like a thing that he fell into. He
Yeah.
was award winning, and it was a shock for a lot of people for him to give up this very successful career and become a firefighter. But watching him in those 20 years, one of the things that I just really appreciated was coming home and having this, in my home view that the work that I'm doing is not life threatening. Like, it is not life or death. It is not it's not as critical as other things that happen in the world.
You're not
And
fighters.
we're not firefighters, but there's a lot that we can learn from it. Like, one of
Yeah.
the things that I learned is that they found joy in their work. They were dealing with lots of, very heavy things, and they learned to separate themselves, to understand that when they were going to a fire or a medical situation, they weren't the ones experiencing the emergency. So they needed to be the ones who had cognitive empathy, understood what others needed out of them, and help people in that situation. And that kept them grounded to not be pulled in by the stress of the job. And I think those lessons can be applied to us, even as knowledge workers. We will fill up our day with the stresses that are there. Like, we will create stress where it may not be real. Yeah, exactly. And so just that remembering that this isn't an emergency, it's not life or death, and we have the ability to change our perspective on it, give ourselves some breathing room, some air around it, and allow ourselves to find joy and to find the things that are fun about what we do. And hopefully that helps make it a little less important and brings the stress down,
Yeah.
so that we can ultimately end up actually doing a much better job.
Absolutely. Operating from a place of fear or stress is not the reality of what we should be thinking about as well. And really thinking about the big picture too, not taking ourselves too seriously and making sure we are thinking about the work and then the people as well. Leah, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christina. It was a pleasure.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers really being seen, heard, and understood, and know that's a requirement for the business to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.